Now I'm going to explain to you a little bit of what comes into the pattern and what you will need to do to get it prepared. Okay, let's get started here. Let's start talking about how this pattern will come together. I'm going to show you the pattern really quickly so that you have an understanding of how this comes together. I'm going to flip it around here. I think you can read it better that way. So what we're looking at right here is we're looking at the final assembly. I like to show this page because it really gives you an idea of how the colors impact the geometric shapes that are going to come out of there. So these are the diamond blocks that you'll build. Here's a triangle block, and these are corner blocks. This is the final assembly after you've made all the different pieces. This actually has some numbered sequences here to tell you which ones to attach first, second, and as you go along through. So it's it's pretty straightforward. I think you guys are talented quilters. It'll be pretty easy to figure out. As part of this, there is the assembly diagram for each of the different components. For example, the star piece consists of 4 different foundation piece sections that you put together to form the star. The triangle piece has 2 sections, and the corner block also has 2 pieces set together. The next section that we have is this color page. It is a coloring page. I did take this and fold it in half, and I made a little bit larger piece so that I could, I just put it right on my printer and did the increased copy size. I copied it to 130% just because I wanted some bigger spaces to do this. If you're unsure of your colors and you want multiples of this, go ahead and do that. If you're like, I'll just use these small ones, that's good enough for me, whatever works for you. If there's anything I've learned about quilters, for sure, they will come up with their own shortcuts and ways of doing things. So this is what it looked like when I finished coloring it. Next, you'll have your actual pattern pieces that you're going to copy in order to make your foundations. So this you'll want to keep in the event that you ever want to do it again. It is an 11 by 17 inch piece of paper. It can be easily copied at a copy center for sure, unless you have a really big printer, but this is 11 by 17. That's the size of these pieces. So the diamond consists of 2 pages, because remember there are 4 sections that go together. The triangle block consists of 2 sections, so 2 pages on that. And then here's that corner block. Again, it also has 2. Now, one of the things, there's a little notation here that says to make sure that you cut out a 1/4 inch on this. I tried to shimmy it over when I copied it, but just in case it doesn't have that 1/4 inch. Anything that is a solid line is a sewing line. Anything that is reflected as a dotted line is the seam allowance. So you'll have to really pay attention to that when you go to trim. And when we get into the actual foundation piecing, I will show you how to do that. Okay, so that's the components of the pattern. So I know that there are plenty of people who have all different ways to do paper piecing. If you go onto YouTube or the internet, you will see a lot of different recommendations on how to do this. I am certainly going to show you the way that I learned to do paper piecing. I did learn this from Judy Niemeyer. If you're familiar with any of her quilts, she actually is a master of paper piecing, and I have to say, you get comfortable with however you learned, and however you learned, as long as it works for you, use whatever process is easiest for you. And that is my process, is the way that I will be demonstrating it when I get to the sewing. But let's talk about preparing the actual foundation itself. Once you've decided on the colors and where they're going to go in your foundation, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take your foundation piece, and you are going to take this big piece. You don't want to be working with this big piece. You're just going to take your paper scissors. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that this solid line is the line you sew on. This dotted line represents the 1/4 inch that you have to keep in place. If you slice off your 1/4 inch, you will not be able to join your pieces together. And I have done that accidentally, and I've had to remake the piece. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim out my diamond sections. I'm using just my paper scissors. You can use your rotary cutter. I'm not that finicky about this. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of trim that away. Now I went right there because they're laid out together, but then I'm going to go out and I'm just going to rough cut around that because I don't need all that extra paper. This will all be trimmed off when you're done putting the fabric on your paper, okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about planning and cutting out your fabrics. First, once I've done my colorway and I know which fabrics are going to go where, I begin to actually write them right onto my foundation that I'm going to be using, so I don't have to guess when I go to get my fabric and place it there. I'm a planner, so one of the things I like to do, and not everybody does this, but I like to have a cutting guide. So what I did was I went through and I actually typed this one out, so if anybody wants this sheet, and I put the different sections. So I don't know how well that's going to come through. I put my different sections. I put a line for what's my color that I'm going to put in there. Originally, I did this just on a piece of notebook paper and just scratched it on there, okay? So I can provide that for anybody who is interested in having that. Now, once I know that, and I wrote it down, I wanted to do it on a nice fancier piece of paper instead of just my notebook. I went ahead and I looked at my sheets here. So this is section B1, and on my list, B1 is white. Now, because it's white, I'm just gonna go ahead and write white. B2, it is also a white. Then I look for B3, and now I have my markers because I don't want to write. You can write it, you can certainly write it, but I think visually when you're using a marker, it's a little bit easier, or a coloring pencil. So my section A3, B3, and B3 are lime green. So I just take my lime green. That's lime green. Then I look at what's pink. B4 is pink. This is B4, pink. And then what's next? B5 is pink. There's my pink. Then I go and I look at next, what's next? B6 is medium blue. So here's my medium blue, here's my B6. And here is my B7 is dark. So there is my dark blue. Now, the next section to make my star that I'm gonna work on is section C. And in my coloring guide and cutting guide, I have listed out the size of the fabric cut that I want and then the colors. So I'm going to take turquoise, which is C1. And then I'm going to look at what is C2 and C3. So lime green, C2 and C3. And then C4 and C5 are going to be yellow. So here is yellow. Okay. So now I've kind of color coded my different foundations and I can get ready to sew the pieces on. But I want to show you something. So earlier this is my A, this is my B. Here is my D. Got D right here as well. Right, so there's D. Now, when you're looking at the assembly diagram, you can sort of see how these go together. And the way that it works is, if I'm looking at the assembly diagram, well, we don't need to look at it. I am going to go ahead and it goes, I know that A hooks up to D. Where's my D? Here's my D. So A hooks up to D, and it hooks up like that. That's how it hooks up. And then this is my C section. My C section goes like this ultimately, and my B section will actually go, I always get this wrong, will go, not that way, this way. will end up going that way, okay? So that is how that will go together. I want to point out that one of the things that I did, my B section and my A section actually have colors in the same places on the fabric. They actually have colors in the same places. And even though my D of my star and my C of my diamond are the same, if you look at them, they're practically interchangeable. But whenever I look at my D, it's going to have yellow in these points and lime green on the outside. When I do my C section, it's going to have lime green on the points and yellow on the outside. So if we were going to look at that on my actual quilt piece, it would look like this. All right, so now let's talk about cutting out pieces of fabric. Again, everybody has their own way of doing this sort of thing. I tend to follow the approach that Carol Doak presents in her book. What she does is she actually provides you measurements for the different sections. So on my cutting list, for example, my sections A and B, which are white, I cut out sections of fabric like this that are 2.5 by 5.5. I know that that's going to fit on my section A1 and B1 and so on. So I cut them out. Now you can cut them out for each, when you're going to do the segment you're going to sew, you can cut them out as you go. You might be of the school that says, you know what, I just need something that's big enough. So you might just decide that you can just take any piece of fabric, lay it on there, hold it up to the light, because you cannot see through this. You can see a little bit of the lines through here, but if you really want to make sure that you're seeing all the way around, you'll want to either put this on a light box or, hold it up to the light so that you can see. I happen to know where this goes. I like having a light box that I can see. Sometimes people will draw the lines on the back just lightly in pencil. One of the things to be aware of in foundation piecing is this is the right side of the foundation, and it is either made of copier paper or printer paper, or you can do specialty papers that you can do. You can trace it, things of that nature. So lots of different approaches to how you create your foundation. You can't see through this really well, so you have to hold it up to the light sometimes. If you cut a big chunk of fabric and you're not concerned about, I need to preserve fabric, some people are, then you don't have to worry too much about that. I'm in the school, I like to cut out some pieces that I know are going to fit around that pretty effectively without too much waste. That was how I learned it, and ultimately it has served me well. All right, so as you can see here, I've cut lime green, I've cut longer pieces here. Now, what about these odd shapes? Now I can easily do the cut a big, triangle kind of thing, or cut a square and cut it in half, and I can fit those in there. So either this and this, right? They're odd shapes. When you get to the points and things of that nature, sometimes that makes it difficult. So the other approach that I took when I cut fabric for this particular pattern was I made a copy of the foundation. For example, this is B7, and I just laid down, I cut it out of the copy that I made of just that section, and I cut around it. And I gave myself really a lot of excess around it. It's probably a good 1/2 inch. Remember, this is my sewing line. This is my sewing line. And because I used a copy, I cut along the sewing line. I need to make sure I preserve at least a 1/4 inch outside of that. But for the fudge factor, I've got about a 1/2 inch. So I made a little stack of those for my B7 section. I did the same thing with B6, and these are for my diamond pieces. I took the same approach when I did my corners and my triangles. And for example, this is a very, Judy Niemeyer does this. She provides templates in any of her patterns, and you can have them. I just made a copy of it. This one is for the triangle. In fact, I wrote on it, fabric template triangle section. And this way I can go ahead and place it on the fabric, and I can just simply cut around it. You know, I just take it really casually and just use my rotary cutter and cut around it. I don't make it overly complicated on that, but it helps me without having to worry too terribly much about not having sufficient fabric. So I did that for my triangles, and I did the same thing for my corner blocks. You know, I just simply made a little copy of the pattern and cut out the pieces so that I could do it around. So just so you know that. And if you do something like that, you know, write on it what you're using it for. So for example, this cutting template right here, it actually fits in several different places. Here, let me put it in here. It fits in several different places of the triangle on the side. It fits in the side triangle piece, and it also fits in components of the corner block. So I don't need to do multiples of those, they're the same. So what I did was I simply cut out one, and I said, okay, A4 is gonna be dark blue, B4 is gonna be dark blue, A3 is gonna be pink, and B3 is going to be my dit dots, or the turquoise. So that's what I did to cut that fabric out. Now, like I said, you can be of the school like I am, cut everything that I'm gonna sew and have it available, but you can be I'm gonna build this piece one at a time, and you can just cut as you go. It's completely up to you. All right, now the next video that we're gonna do is I'm gonna actually show you how we sew it onto the paper. Thanks.